welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/follow. Today in the show, we have Nanette Nuessle. She is a pediatric hospitalist and a physician coach. She wrote the Kevin MD article, The Relationship Between Communication and Burnout. Nanette, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
We'll get into the article in a little bit, but first off, just share your story and journey to where you are today.
My journey as to where I got to where I am today is I am a pediatric hospitalist. I started out as a traditional pediatrician, and after several years, I started working as a locum physician. And after a few years as a locum, transitioned into being a pediatric hospitalist and found that that was really my niche. I really prefer stamping out fires and going from emergency to emergency rather than being in the office all day and answering the same questions over and over and over. And it just really suited me.
And tell me about that transition from a pediatric hospitalist to what you're doing now as a physician coach.
Oh, goodness. So I was working in a small rural hospital, a 50-bed hospital, and I had gone there to help them reopen their L&D unit. And they'd had an L&D unit. They closed it for a couple of years. They were trying to reopen that. They brought back a nurse manager out of retirement, and she told them that she would give them 3 months of her time, but then she wanted to go back in retirement. She actually gave them 6 months of her time, but then when her husband retired, she retired also. They had been searching for a nurse manager the entire time she'd been there, hired someone, but then didn't give that someone the nurse manager position. They gave her the charge nurse position. So because she only had 5 years experience and they wanted someone more experienced in the managerial position. So she came in with a chip on her shoulder and took it out on me. I have 30 years experience as a physician, 10 of those as a pediatric hospitalist. And she started arguing with every order I wrote. Since I was in the hospital, like 8-10 hours a day, I spent a lot of my time educating the parents about their new babies, and a lot of my time educating our new nurses. A lot of our nurses were only a year or two out of nursing school. She would go back behind me and undo all of that education, not just with the parents, but also with the nursing staff. Then she started arguing policy with me, including policies that I'd helped write. And eventually she got to where she would be throwing things at me, and always when there was never a witness. I went through a coaching course, and I learned that my code is primarily action. We use what we call the BANK methodology of personality science, and BANK is an acronym that stands for Blueprint, Action, Nurturing, and Knowledge. And my primary code is action. Well, I speed coded her code and learned that hers is blueprint. And the action code and the blueprint code are opposites, and they tend to clash. The action code values things like flexibility and freedom, and the blueprint code values things like structure and systems and rules, whereas the action looks at rules as the spirit of the rule, and there can be exceptions to rules, and the blueprint doesn't look at rules that way. When I started speaking to her in the language of her values, now the BANK methodology for each personality, each of the 4 personalities, there are 12 core values. When I started speaking to her in her core values, all of a sudden she had no traction to start an argument. The anxiety level in our unit was so high that people were starting to leave labor and delivery and go to med-surg or go to the ER or even leave our hospital altogether and go to other hospitals. That does not normally happen. People vie for spots in labor and delivery because it's normally a happy place to work. You get to cuddle new babies. You bring new life into the world. It's less stressful than a lot of the units. No, people were leaving labor and delivery to go to more stressful areas of the hospital and work. Within 3 days, the anxiety level in our unit went from a 10 out of 10 to a 3 out of 10. Within 3 weeks, managers from other areas of the hospital were coming to me and asking me to do conflict resolution on their units. Physicians from around the hospital were coming to me and asking me to help them negotiate contract renewals. And so I started going around the hospital and teaching this system at Lunch and Learns, and we got the anxiety level throughout the hospital lowered. That's how I became a coach.
So tell me some of the cases that you see physicians come to you with as a coach. What are some of the major issues that you find when they talk to you?
I've had physicians come to me because someone in the hospital had put something false in the chart
Hmm.
that resulted in an accusation against the physician. For example, I had a physician who got a call from the nursing staff about something going on with the parent and didn't actually call the physician to come back, but, well, this family needs to speak to you. So the doctor got on the phone and spoke with the family and thought it was all straightened out. What the nurse documented in the chart was doctor refused to come in. So we sat down and we spoke about how the communication went in that situation, teaching the nurse to ask for what she wanted, teaching the nurse to know the difference between, did the family actually want the physician to come in, or did the nurse want the physician to come in? And the doctor would have been happy to come in, but he wasn't actually asked to come in, and getting all of those sorts of things straightened out. I had a situation where a nurse got written up for sleeping on the job. Now, this was at a refugee camp where he was working 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Hmm.
And they had long stretches during the night where none of the refugees came into their acute care clinic in the middle of the night. So, like, they would work their butts off from 6 p.m. when they arrived, and then somewhere around 1 o'clock, the patients would sort of peter off and there might not be anybody come in between then and when they went off duty, or they might have 2 or 3 patients come in, or they might have a whole nother wave come in. You never knew. So they were encouraged to work on stores and things like that. But if there was nothing to do, sometimes they would just lay down in their swamp area, or I don't want they know the command station, whatever they called it there, and snooze for a while. Some of the nurses, however, would actually lay down in the treatment rooms and sleep, and he was one of them that got caught doing that. And he felt that it was because he was Black and gay.
Hmm.
And I got called in to look into that. Turns out that there were 2 other nurses who were also Black and gay who were doing that, and nobody wrote them up. The difference was he was an A-type personality. He was one of these persons who drew attention to everything he did. That was his personality. He loved attention. Well, if you draw attention to everything you do, and then you do something that might be borderline breaking the rules,
Hmm.
you might get written up for that. So what was recommended by the superior officer was, if you want to take a nap, perhaps you should go out and take a nap in your car. They didn't tell him he couldn't sleep when there were no patients. They just suggested that he do it in a more subtle way. So it came down to personality and communication again. So what I do is I teach people to look at how your personality comes across, look at the personalities that you're working with, and how do you communicate with those personalities? How do you shift from dealing with this personality to that personality to that personality? Can you shift into those personality roles and communicate with them better?
And speaking of communication, you talk more about that in your Kevin MD article titled The
Yes.
Relationship Between Communication and Burnout. Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read that article, just briefly walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it.
Yes, I was talking to some colleagues of mine who could not believe that communication could help with burnout. The relationship gets back to what I was speaking about earlier about values.
Mhm.
When we speak to one another's values, we actually learn to value that person better. And we learn to value what it is they're talking about. And then that other person actually feels that. They feel acknowledged, and they feel appreciated. They feel valued. What is the biggest thing we're dealing with in burnout right now? People don't feel valued and appreciated. And
Mhm.
those are the biggest drivers of burnout. They're the biggest drivers of staff retention. They're what is driving people out of healthcare. And so if we can teach people to use this personality science to learn one another's values, to listen to other people's values, and to speak to those values, we can do a lot to stop the drivers of burnout and to stop and to deal with staff retention. And I know this works because I've actually done it and I've actually taught it and trained it. And I've seen it make a difference in organizations in under 4 hours. We went into an organization and did a training, and I was told that 2 of the doctors wouldn't attend. They simply weren't going to show up. There was no reason to even expect them to be there. So what I did was I picked up the phone and I called those 2 doctors. They weren't going to attend because they hadn't spoken to one another in 18 months. When they would see each other in the hallways, they would turn and go the other way. So I called each one of them. They each told me, oh, I'm going to be on call. I won't be able to make it. So I said, look, it's just a 2-day weekend retreat. Come in the morning after you finish your rounds and stay for as long as you possibly can. And when they showed up, they each sat at opposite ends of the back of the room, which I thought was, okay, I kind of expected that.
Mm-hmm.
And the person that was co-leading the training with me intentionally put them in breakout sessions together twice that first morning with other people, but intentionally put them together. By noon, those 2 gentlemen chose to sit down at a table together for lunch. And I thought this could be either really bad or really good. And again, the person that was co-leading with me said, don't worry about it. And I came back from our lunch break early to check on them. These 2 gentlemen who had not spoken to each other in 18 months they were at opposite ends of the table originally. They had scooted together and were sitting right across from each other, laughing and telling stories and telling jokes and catching up on everything that had happened in their personal lives over the last 18 months. That's how powerful this can be when you start appreciating each other and speaking to one another's values.
So let's say I'm a physician leader running a group of clinicians, and you mentioned things about staff retention being an issue.
Yeah.
What are some specific ways that I can understand someone else's values?
The best way is to reach out to us and go through one of our trainings, because it's difficult to get into all of it
Mm-hmm.
in just 15 minutes over a podcast. And we do offer several levels of training. Short of that, just really, really listen to what is important to people.
Mm-hmm.
Buying them pizza, it doesn't cut it anymore.
Mm-hmm. We're talking to Nanette Nuessle. She is a pediatric hospitalist and a physician coach. She wrote the Kevin MD article, The Relationship Between Communication and Burnout. Nanette, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
My take-home message, the first one would be, there are 3 levels of listening. Listening to answer, listening to understand, and listening to value. And I can teach people how to listen to value. That will change your world. The next one is communication is everything. There are a lot of leadership values out there. I used to think that integrity was my top leadership value, and I have since learned that communication is absolutely everything. And the third is we all make mistakes. You can come back from it. We can help you.
And how can people reach you?
You can reach me through my email which is Dr. Nan, DRNAN, at beatdownburnout.com, or by going to my website, beatdownburnout.com.
Nanette, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you. It's been an honor.